The Pahlavi Dynasty, established by Reza Shah in 1925, aimed to modernize Iran through secularization, infrastructure development, and social reforms. However, his authoritarian rule and suppression of religious influence created tensions. His son, Mohammad Reza Shah, continued modernization but faced opposition, especially after the CIA-backed coup of 1953 that reinstated his power. The White Revolution brought economic and social changes but deepened political repression, leading to widespread discontent. By the late 1970s, economic disparity, corruption, and repression fueled protests, culminating in the Iranian Revolution of 1979. Ayatollah Khomeini's return marked Iran's transition into an Islamic Republic, fundamentally reshaping its political and social landscape. Let's travel to the history. By the early 20th century, Iran was a nation poised for change. Following the Qajar dynasty's decline, the Pahlavi dynasty emerged, led by a military officer named Reza Khan. His rule and later that of his son, Mohammad Reza Shah, aimed to modernize Iran and transform it into a powerful, independent state. However, the Pahlavis' efforts also brought repression, heavy Western influence, and rising discontent, which ultimately culminated in the Iranian Revolution of 1979. This period was marked by a complex blend of nationalism, secular reform, and religious revival, all leading to one of the most significant revolutions of the 20th century. The story of the Pahlavi dynasty begins with Reza Khan, an ambitious officer in the Persian Cossack Brigade. In 1921, he led a coup that seized control of the government and, by 1925, had dethroned the last Qajar ruler. Reza Khan crowned himself as Reza Shah Pahlavi, marking the beginning of the Pahlavi dynasty. His vision was to restore Iran's strength, transforming it into a modern nation-state that could resist foreign influence and economic dependency. Reza Shah embarked on an aggressive program of modernization and secularization. Inspired by European and Turkish reforms, he built infrastructure, including roads, railways, and schools. He aimed to reduce the power of the clergy, and secularized Iran's legal system, creating a more centralized government. Education reforms encouraged literacy and scientific advancement, while women's rights were expanded. Women were encouraged to abandon the veil, and restrictions on dress were enforced to promote a more modern appearance. However, Reza Shah's reforms were not universally welcomed. His secular policies clashed with conservative religious values, and his authoritarian style alienated many Iranians. Despite these challenges, Reza Shah's rule set Iran on a course toward modernization, but also set the stage for future conflicts between secularism and religion in Iranian society. When World War II broke out, Iran declared itself neutral. However, its strategic location and oil resources made it a valuable asset to both the Allies and Axis powers. Reza Shah's perceived pro-German sympathies worried the Allies, particularly Britain and the Soviet Union, who feared that Iran might fall under Nazi influence. In 1941, British and Soviet forces invaded Iran, forcing Reza Shah to abdicate in favor of his son, Mohammad Reza Shah. The occupation of Iran by foreign powers during the war deepened Iranian resentment of foreign interference. While the Allies used Iran as a supply route to support the Soviet Union, the experience of occupation left lasting scars. Mohammad Reza Shah, only 21 years old at the time, inherited a country wary of foreign influence and internal divisions, but also eager for modernization and reform. With the end of World War II, Mohammad Reza Shah sought to solidify his power and continue his father's modernization efforts. In 1953, his rule faced a major crisis. Iran's Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, had become immensely popular for his stance on nationalizing the oil industry, which had been under British control for decades. Mossadegh's nationalization of Iranian oil was seen as a bold assertion of sovereignty, and it won him widespread support. However, the British, with American support, feared losing control of Iranian oil and the region's political stability. In 1953, the CIA and British intelligence orchestrated a coup, overthrowing Mossadegh and reinstating Mohammad Reza Shah as the central authority. Known as Operation Ajax, the coup deepened resentment toward the Shah, who was now seen as a puppet of Western interests. Although the Shah had regained power, the coup damaged his legitimacy in the eyes of many Iranians, creating a rift that would continue to grow in the coming decades. In the 1960s, Mohammad Reza Shah launched the White Revolution, a sweeping series of reforms intended to modernize Iran and address social inequalities. The White Revolution included land reforms to redistribute land to peasants, industrialization projects, and efforts to promote women's rights, including granting women the right to vote. While these reforms aimed to uplift Iran, they met with mixed reactions. Many traditional landowners and clergy opposed the White Revolution, seeing it as an attack on their authority and values. The Shah's reforms also fueled rural to urban migration, creating urban populations that were often discontented with the lack of political freedom and economic disparity. The rapid pace of change, coupled with the authoritarian nature of the Shah's regime, led to a disconnect between the monarchy and the people. By the 1970s, Iran was experiencing rapid economic growth, fueled by its vast oil revenues. However, this wealth was not equally distributed, and corruption within the government led to economic disparities. Many Iranians felt excluded from the benefits of Iran's newfound wealth, and the Shah's extravagant lifestyle became a symbol of this inequality. While the Shah was investing in military equipment and holding lavish celebrations to mark Iran's 500-year-old monarchy, ordinary Iranians were struggling to make ends meet. The Shah's rule was also marked by political repression. His secret police, Savak, cracked down on dissent and political opposition. The regime imprisoned, tortured, and executed political activists, journalists, and religious leaders who criticized his policies. This atmosphere of fear and oppression created widespread resentment and drove opposition underground. Among the opposition, two influential groups emerged: the secular leftists, inspired by Marxist ideology, and the Islamist faction, led by the charismatic cleric Ayatollah Khomeini, who had been exiled for his vocal opposition to the Shah, became a symbol of resistance. From his exile in Najaf, Iraq, he spoke out against the Shah's secular policies. Western influence and oppressive rule, advocating for an Islamic government based on religious principles. Khomeini's message resonated deeply, especially among the lower and middle classes, who felt disenfranchised by the Shah's regime. By the late 1970s, discontent with the Shah was boiling over, setting the stage for a full-scale revolution. The revolution began as a series of protests in 1978, initially sparked by a defamatory article about Khomeini in a government newspaper. Students, religious leaders, workers, and intellectuals took to the streets, demanding political reform, economic justice, and an end to the Shah's rule. The protests quickly spread throughout Iran, gaining momentum as different factions united against the regime. The Shah's attempts to quell the protests through martial law and military force only fueled the anger of the people. On Black Friday, in September 1978, government forces opened fire on protesters in Tehran, killing hundreds and shocking the nation. The brutal response to peaceful protests further delegitimized the Shah's rule and galvanized opposition groups. By January 1979, the Shah, overwhelmed by the protests and suffering from health issues, fled Iran. He hoped that leaving would allow for a peaceful transition, but the revolution had gained unstoppable momentum. On February 1, 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran after 15 years in exile, greeted by millions of supporters. The Shah's regime quickly collapsed, and by April, Iran had officially declared itself an Islamic Republic, with Khomeini as its supreme leader. The establishment of the Islamic Republic marked a profound shift in Iran's identity and governance. The new government dismantled the Pahlavi-era institutions, replacing them with an Islamic-based system of governance. The monarchy was abolished, and the constitution of the Islamic Republic established a theocratic state, with ultimate authority vested in the supreme leader. Khomeini's vision for Iran was based on Islamic principles, and he sought to create a society governed by religious law. The revolutionary government implemented strict Islamic laws, including mandatory veiling for women and restrictions on Western cultural influences. Education, media, and public life were restructured to align with Islamic values, and opposition to the new regime was quickly suppressed. The revolution was seen as a victory for the people over a corrupt, authoritarian regime, but it also led to years of political and social upheaval. Many of the secular and leftist groups that had supported the revolution found themselves marginalized or persecuted under the new Islamic regime. Iran's relationship with the West, particularly the United States, became deeply strained. The 1979 hostage crisis, in which Iranian students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and held American diplomats hostage for 444 days, symbolized the new regime's rejection of Western influence. The Pahlavi dynasty's legacy is a complex one. Reza Shah and Mohammad Reza Shah both made significant strides in modernizing Iran, establishing it as a regional power and laying the groundwork for economic and industrial growth. However, their focus on secularization and alignment with the West, coupled with authoritarian policies, ultimately alienated a significant portion of the Iranian population. The Iranian Revolution was a defining moment in modern history, not just for Iran but for the entire Middle East. It signaled a shift from secular nationalism to religious governance, inspiring Islamist movements across the region. For Iranians, the revolution brought both the promise of independence and the challenge of navigating a theocratic system that would evolve over the following